welcome our today's speaker, John Chirikjian.
6:45 a.m. Wake up. 6:47 to 6:54. Brush teeth and change. 6:55 to 7:14. Look over notes for class and pack backpack. 7:15 to 7:24. Eat breakfast and pack lunchbox. 7:25 to 7:51. Get to school. Every night of his fourth grade life, young John would map out a plan for the following day down to the minute. Nothing could be left up for chance, as he would know his day's schedule by 11 p.m. the night prior. It very well may have been the product of years of rigid Catholic schooling, but he could not be sure. Young John simply knew that upon turning 9, he resolved to eliminate all risk from his life, living by a stringent schedule he deemed unalterable and using little else besides cold logic when faced with decisions. He followed the lessons and rules imposed by teachers who made him ask questions like, what are the repercussions of my actions? And why do something that you know carries horrible consequences? Young John imagined a place where everyone thought before they acted and made the best decisions possible. He thought that by living under a strict schedule with a strict code of principles, there would be no way to ever mess up. People would follow the honor code and circumvent mistakes and remove any trace of danger. They would live the way they have always been told to live. And it would be so utterly great, yet at the same time, so utterly boring. The realization only struck months later upon being assigned a short writing project for English class. The prompt, describe what you love to do in spring, including key words such as spring and fun. After thinking for several minutes, he noticed that he had nothing interesting to write about. His life was nothing like that of his favorite action heroes or video game characters, and he had few memorable experiences worth discussing. He decided that following the rules was simply no fun. If you haven't noticed by now, I was young John 8 years ago. But this discovery holds true today. Being smart and tackling life logically may minimize risk of failure and bring social success, but not necessarily happiness. For we are natural risk takers. A life devoid of risk is one devoid of any chance of failure or conflict. And as splendid as this may sound, we thrive in such conflict. The 9-year-old John was scared to lose and attempted to eliminate all flaws through rigorous planning while striving towards perfection. Yet tragedy and defeat foster so much more human emotion, passion, and wisdom than success or doing right ever can. There is inherent good in the bad. Now, going back to my story, while other students wrote their essays as told, I continued to rack my head for potential topics. I concluded that not having done enough bad in my life, I might as well start then. So I picked up my pen and drew a horrific cartoon idolizing a murdering, psychotic anti-hero whose name happened to be Spring. It was extremely inappropriate and insensitive by all means, and it touched on things that no fourth grader should ever think of. The nuns were appalled. Yet, the spontaneous and poor decision produced two unforeseeable outcomes that have shaped much of who I am. First, I began yearning for freedom from my existing life, and went to search for new schools to attend, such as Gilman. Second, my cartoon served as a precursor to future short stories and screenplays I'd write after school, ultimately evoking my passion for film. So one of my favorite quotes comes from the actor Will Rogers, who once said, "Good judgment comes from experience, but experience comes from bad judgment." Our imperfections can serve as our defining strengths, generating diversity and our most memorable experiences. We all make our fair share of poor decisions, which in turn give us unique lives and outlooks that define who we are and differentiates us from one another. We are composed of our flaws. Mistakes, losses, and setbacks to our life plan may very well hurt, but we rarely feel more rawly human than in a state of dejection. For perfection was never meant to be achieved, nor should it necessarily be our goal. Growing up, my father often told me how striving to get straight A's through life is good, but a B or C every now and then shows character. But let me place a distinction between accepting your flaws as you take risks and being bad for the sake of being bad. When you have an opportunity at hand and the choice is an easy one, by all means make the right decisions. And while I tell you to take risks, I myself am a hypocrite. There are plenty of risks that the 9-year-old John and me still prevent me from taking. In fact, I'm sure that many of you in the audience are more daring or valiant than I could ever hope to be. Our yearning for risk is also, to some extent, paradoxical. We drift towards risky situations because we want to experience the thrill and the sublime sensation. Yet nobody wants to actually get hurt, so we work hard to minimize the risk of our actions. We want the risk without the risk. For example, we ride roller coasters in order to simulate the sensation of falling, but nobody wants to fall to their deaths. We drive fast at night while taking every precaution to ensure our own safety. We gamble or start a precarious project as we try to maximize our odds. We want to fool ourselves into believing that we're taking a risk while we're not taking much of a risk at all. It's because risk amplifies the worth of success, and the sensation of being on the verge of failure makes us feel alive unlike any other. Now for the flip side. So after one takes a risk and loses, he's often filled with a feeling of regret. At the end of my sophomore year, I failed a final math exam after not putting quite enough effort into studying beforehand. Mrs. Williams, my teacher, offered to meet with me to go over my mistakes in order to make sure I would be well prepared the following year. So towards the end of June, she came to Cary Hall and helped me go over problems for several minutes before changing the subject. She asked me how I've been, and we discussed my random interests like running in the summer's heat and making movies and selling books. Before leaving, she turned to me and said, "Be sure not to harbor any regrets. I've floated along and made my fair share of mistakes, but I can happily say that I have no regrets, and nothing feels better when you're my age than knowing you've lived a long life you're happy about. That's very important." She told me I could contact her in case I ever needed anything, and quickly departed. Within 2 months, on the first day of my junior year, Mrs. Williams passed away from lung cancer. We avoid problems and regret any issues or mistakes that arise. Too often do we label failure as the antithesis to happiness. We associate defeat and loss with misery. However, the true opposite to happiness is regret. Regret is our inability to come to terms with reality, our inability to cope and learn and move on. Regret makes us ponder what should have been done differently, rather than focus on what can be done moving forwards. Regret condemns an entire life experience as not worth having and attempts to invalidate parts of who we are. After all, since we don't want to eliminate risk or failure, we best learn how to manage regret. And regret is, by all means, very manageable. So Mrs. Williams often referred to floating along and rolling with the punches. I cannot remember a time where she wasn't smiling and she exuded a sense of optimism wherever she went. It wasn't a matter of being smart or avoiding mistakes. It relied entirely on perspective. She simply seemed happy, and the fact that my last conversation with her revolved around regret speaks true to this very testament. For in the end, long-term happiness is a state of mind that cannot be bought or won over by intelligence or success or wealth or social standing. Rather, it is entirely dependent on perspective and how we choose to view our mistakes and begin again. Thank you.